So let's look at layout in CSS. When we talk about CSS, there are three main things that you need to understand, three main components that you need to understand. One is that CSS box model, which you are already familiar. I've already demonstrated that thing in the lab. Floating and positioning. Okay. So let's start with the first one, that is the CSS model. This is a theory behind it. Now, whenever we think of using CSS, every every container, or you could use the word that is every block element. So every block element of CSS is assumed to be a rectangular in shape, and every element that you put is supposed to have this kind of setting. So you have the content like a text, and there is a area that this particular content will cover, and then surrounding this content is a padding area, followed by an optional border that you want to display around this component, and following this border you have a border area, and finally you have the mark. Every block element will follow this structure. You have a content, and there will be a padding between the content and the outer edges. This padding is required to have some visual separation between one place and the other one. So let's look at each and every one of them. We'll start with the content first. So for example, we have a content here with some text, and this content is placed within a border. So this is an optional. You want, you keep the border, or you don't like it, don't display the border. However, the distance between the border and the actual content is called as the padding, and this content is placed in a margin. So there is a margin which is not shown over here, that goes outside the border area. So let's start with the content area. What is the meaning of saying content area? So the content area includes the text or images or any box that you want to display. So anything that you are typing, it may be an image altogether. That's the actual content that is being shown. Again, when you put the content, it doesn't mean that the browser is going to show a dotted line across it. It's just to tell you that you get some content. Okay. Now this content, you can anytime you can specify the width for the actual box, and the way in which you specify it, either using the absolute measurement, like using the pixel, or using the inches and the other measures which people don't rarely use it. The most frequently used is the pixel, or you can use the relative values. Now the relative values could be m. M refers to with relation to the font size. So if the font size is 12, 1m refers to the 12. With, if you say 1.5m, that means to say that if the default font size is 10, 1.5m means 1.5 of the default font size. That's going to be 15. So you are relative to the font size, existing font size, whatever the browser default is there, relative to that size, you are increasing. So that's what is called as a relative. Next one is the percentage. Now percentage refers to the percentage of the container. Suppose if you place something inside a div. Suppose if this is a div and your text will come here. If you say percentage, then the percentage is with respect to the div in which this particular text or this particular image is shown, with respect to the container object. Now if you don't have any container, it just means to say that the outermost container, or that the root of the page, and the root of the page is actually the browser client area that usually you are getting it. So if there is no other container, if you specify the percentage, it means to say that with respect to the browser client area. The next one is the padding. So you have the actual content area here that takes some width. You can specify it using the height and width for the content area, and the area that is surrounding this content and the margin. So the area between the margin edges and the content area. That is what is the padding. And padding is usually used to have some separation between the border. So if you have if you put a border and if you don't put the padding, the text will go and touch the border and it will not look nice. So if you want to have some visual separation, you can have the padding. However, there are few things you must understand. You can't have a negative padding values. That means to say that you cannot, if you have a border here, you cannot get the text on that border. It is not possible. And setting the border will not have any effect on the background context. Like if you have a background image or this kind of thing, the value of the padding will not affect the visual content, any graphics or any background that you put there. If you change the padding, the content area may change, this area will change, but the behind the scene, if you have a graphic or some color or anything, that is not affected by the padding. So you can set the padding by top, by specifying the value at the top, by specifying the value at the right, bottom, and to the left. Individually, you can do it, or you can go for a shortcut methods, or you can just specify one value and ask the CSS to use the same value across all the corners. So if you want to specify individually, then you have to use the padding dash top, specify the value, padding dot left, specify the value, padding dot bottom, specify the value, and padding dot the top, bottom, and the other value. Or if you want to use the shortcut, you can just say padding 10 pixel. That means to say that everywhere it is 10 pixel. Or you can use two values. There is no comma separation here. You can use two values. Two means the same value has to be used in two places. Remember, it did not be 10 and 10. It could be 10 and 50, 50, 10, 20, 10, anything. The first value is top and bottom. So the first value, if you say 10 here, if you say 10, the first 10 refers to the placing at the top and bottom. The same value will be repeated on the top and bottom. The second value that you specify will be for the left and right. The same value. If you say 50 as the second value, both the side it will come as 50. So in this case, what is going to happen is the top and bottom will get 10 and the left and right will get 10. The other one is specifying all of them. If you are lazy and if you don't want to type all of them, you can use the shortcut. The shortcut is specify all the values separated by space. And one thing you must notice here is there is no space between the value and the unit of measurement. In this case, it is pixel. Do not put the space between them, otherwise you will confuse the CSS altogether. Next one is the border. Now, border is optional. If you want, you put the border. You specify the border, or you don't specify it for you. Sometimes to have some highlights, we just put a border across it. It's just a visual separation between one element on the other element. So if you want to separate something, you can use it, and you know very well most of the time you don't enter into using it. But if you use it, it is going to look like one face, and the other one will appear like the other face. So what is a border? Again, when you specify a border, you must understand one thing. These are applicable to the block element. Now we have inline element, like span is there. The span will not behave where if you set something to the span, if you say span, I want you to change the width to 100, span will not obey for that. So span is inline. I hope you know the difference between inline and a block element. When you say block element, it will take a block. The other things will not come in between. So if you say this is a block, whatever you put will come either this place, or if you float it, it may come to the other side. So block means it will take one full block of area, and you can create a block and then float it and do something. Usually block means it's going to have its own space within the your browser. Now what is inline is if you want this part to be bold, you can make that part face to be bold. That means it is applied to only that particular face. it will not take its own space. When you make this border, suppose if you make this part as bold here, B as bold here, that does not mean that this is going to shift down and that piece will show as a one individual block. So inline means it will be happy with the other element across it, whereas block is not happy with the other element near to it. Now, when we have the border is applied to the block, and border is always something that comes after the padding. So, after the padding area, the border will come, and you can have a negative border. That means to say that the padding cannot go beyond the border. You can't say the border has to come inside the padding area by giving some negative value. It's not going to work altogether. If it is not specified, no border will be shown. Okay, so if you want, you show it. You don't like, you don't show it. Again, you have the same things for it. When you specify the border across all the four corners, or you do it using a shortcut. But when you specify a border, there are three things that you need to specify. One is the width of the border, either in terms of a relative or in terms of an absolute value. The style, like a dash, dotted, or other thing, and the color that you want to specify. Also, you can have a special effect by introducing a graphics inside it. Now, the way in which you specify here is either you say border top width. I don't know whether you'll be able to say it. I think you'll be able to say that. Top width, bottom width, right width, and so on. Top color, bottom color, you can individually specify it, and top style, bottom style, and so on. These three pieces can be individually specified by, if you are good in typing, you can do that thing, but if you are not, you can go for a shortcut. Some of the border styles that will appear, solid, dash, dotted, and you have blue, and so on and so forth. None means nothing is going to appear. The other one, I think you are already familiar. The other way of specifying it is you just go here and then say border, and then specify the width, specify the style and color. Okay, so that's straightforward. This is what you are usually doing, and most of the time you will see that option, which is much easier to understand. Again, you can make the border curve by specifying a border radius. You can individually make the radius across the different places. Now, what's the meaning of saying radius is this is the place? So, if you say top radius is 60 here, that means that curve will come like 60 here, 60 top and 60 right. So, if you say here top and where is that top thing? Top and right. So, here you have top right here. So, top right radius is 60, 60. It's going to appear. Come on. It's going to appear like this. So, if you say top left 20, that's it, it's going to come like this. So, it just means to say that you can have different radius for different locations. It's not that you have to have the same thing everywhere. So, you can have, like, if you notice over here, it is not like a circle, or it is not like a rounded rectangle. Again, you can specify everything in a straightforward way. If you notice at the bottom side, you have at the bottom you notice you have the border radius 20, 60. Directly you can specify. Again, it is in the clockwise direction. You can specify one. It will not be always a circle. You can make it like an elliptical. So you can say border radius 150 pixel cross 80 pixel. So you can make it like this. So it's an elliptical one. If you notice the previous one, it was a perfect circle. At any place, you can even make it like to look like a elliptical one. So need not have a smooth curvature. You can anytime change it. The next one is after this border, you get the margin. So margin comes outside this border. So it's a spacing between one component and the other element that you are putting it there. Some of the things, so margin comes outside the border and it can have negative value. That means you can crisscross one element's margin with the other element. So you can intentionally bring one of the elements on top of the other element by changing its margin altogether. Okay, when you change this margin, the background element, whatever you have put, everything is affected by the margin setting. Okay, and again, as usual, you can set all the margin at one shot, or you can do the individual values. So the one that is being shown here is the individual values. You can have the top 0, so there is no margin. Then it is 5 pixel. This is the margin, 6 pixel and 5 pixel. Inside that, you can have the padding 20 pixel. So the top is this is 12 here. Then 10, 30 and 12. This is not this 20. This is supposed to be 12. The top 12 and the other area. Again, the way in which you specify it in the clockwise direction, always remember that the values should be specified. If you are doing it in a shortcut way, it's always coming in the clockwise direction, top, left, right, left, and bottom and the left. So it goes in the clockwise direction. Always goes in that direction. You can specify it any way you want it, or you can use if you want the same values across every location, just give one value. If you say 20, that means 20 will be there across all. And if you say margin is 5, one value means it is to be used everywhere. Two values means the two adjacent side, left and right will get it, top and bottom will get the value. So here, if you notice, in this case, margin 0 pixel, top and bottom will get 0 pixel. 5 pixel, there are two values are there, left and right will get the 5 pixel. Here, if you say padding 10, that means top and bottom will get 10, and the second one will be for the left. And there is the other one, that is the when you specify the margin, you can go for the auto. Auto means you are just asking the browser automatically align. Usually that is used to center the content, and I think I've already demonstrated that. There. Now there are some things you must understand. If you have two adjacent margin, usually the browser will collapse one margin with the other. The largest margin will be used. What do I mean by that is, if you have a bottom margin 30 and the top margin of the next element 20, it's going to merge these two and it's going to take the largest value as the separation. So it's going to combine them and make it as a single, and it's true even on the other side also. So for example, you have a margin of 30 and there is one more element that is contained. One element is inside the other element, and this element has the margin, top margin as 20. What it's going to do is it's going to club them together and it's going to use it as a single value. So you must remember that when you are trying to, when you set a margin, you will find that it's not behaving in the way that you expect it to do. The reason is it's actually clubbing the margin together, and there are a lot of tools are available. Most of them are the plugins that you can use to on-fly check what the CSS is trying to do. For example, the Firebug is there, and I have the plugins. I will tell you how to install those plugins into the Firefox, and they will online show you what the CSS is trying to do. When you try to apply something and you feel that the CSS is behaving very differently, use the tools, usually in the form of a plugin, that will on-fly will tell you what width it is trying to show. Okay? And that will give you an idea as to how to set your content. Now just to summarize the content, so you have a content here. The content has its own width and height, and the content is any element. Surrounding the content you have the padding. Usually you give the width and height for your content. If it is a block, again remember, if it is an inline element, it will not behave with the, or it will not respect your width and height. So do not try to give the width and height for a span. None of the browser will help you in that case. Span automatically takes the maximum required space, and they are happy with it. Whereas this block element, like by the way, the image is actually considered to be inline element. But a strange thing about the image is it behaves like a block element. Even though image is considered like a inline, you can specify the width and height of the image. It will respect that. That's a special case. Whereas the text, ordinary text that you type, and if you want to say, I want from here to here, I want everything to be block bold, and if you say that span has to come 20, width is 20, 30, nothing is going to happen. The browser will simply ignore that kind of setting. Only it is possible with the block element. The next one is the border that will surround it, and you have the four borders, and then you have the margin. So let's switch back to the form. And in the most of the time, whenever you want to, I think I'm running two slides. So you have used this is not a strange thing. Whenever you are creating a web pages, most of the time you want the user to send some input to your application. And the way in which you collect the input from the user is using the forms. So these forms help you to collect the information from the user. Why this is so special is, you know very well your application, when you talk about an online application, your application is running on the client side. It's not on the same machine. When you are building a Windows application, either a C program or a Java program or anything, entire action happens on your machine. Whereas when you build a web application, part of it happens on your web server, other part happens on the client side. So the client may be anywhere on the internet. So from that machine, if you want to get some input to your server, then we use the forms. Okay. This is not an issue in your C program or your ordinary Java program, because the user will be interacting directly on the machine, and your entire application is running on the same machine. Whereas here, your PHP is running on your web server, your content, that's a browser, is running on the client machine. So from the client machine, whatever they type, if you want that thing to come onto your application, we use the web form. The bad part about HTML is the HTML just says how to use the form, but the HTML, text of the HTML does not say how to process the input. It just says how to get the input onto your web server, and once you get the input from the user, once you get the data from the user, what are you supposed to do with that thing? The specs does not say anything about it. So once I get the input from the remote client onto my web server, what am I supposed to do? For that, I am supposed to run a script or an application or anything. It's up to me. So the application could be a PHP application, a ASP application, a JSP application, or a C program, or anything. The specs just says, how do you get something from the client side onto the server side? You get the information to the server side, then do whatever you want to do along with it. In our case, we assume that we have a PHP script that is going to do some action. So this is usually what we do. We collect the information from the user. User submits that. It comes as a HTTP request to our server. We do some PHP processing over here, and finally we return the value back to the user after processing their input, like you are successfully registered, or your password has failed, or anything for that matter. Now, how do I get the information from the user? We have a built-in element called as a form that helps us to get the value from the user. Now, form is not something new in HTML5. Form was there right from the old ages. So form contains many other elements like checkboxes, radio buttons, and other things that helps the user to send the input to our application. What's the format? We have in a very plain format is form. Put some input element / form. That's the end of it. However, the form takes many attributes. Some of them are the name and ID. Now, this is a bit confusing for everyone. There is a name for the form and there is an ID for the form. Why two things? Why they are done with two things? always remember when you use the name, this name will be used on the server. When you use the ID, that name will be used on the client. So if you are running a JavaScript, it runs only on the client machine. If you are running a CSS, you want to format it using the CSS action occurs on the client side, you need ID. You are running a JSP, ASP, PHP, you need a name. So this name is on the server, the IDs are on there on the client. Should I give the same name and ID? The answer is no, it's up to you. How you want to confuse yourself, it's only up to you. So you can give different name or conflicting name, but it works with the CSS. Remember, just because I have a variable called as order in my PHP script, do not try to change the ID as order, because what happens is when you try to change this ID, the CSS that is associated with it automatically goes on. So always be careful. If you are a server-side scripter, so that means if you are working on a live project and your work is on PHP or ASP or JSP, never touch that ID. The reason is the minute you touch that ID, the JavaScript behind it will fail, the CSS behind it will fail. So those people who are writing the JavaScript, those people who are designing and using the CSS, they will not disturb you by changing the name. So they don't bother about the name, and in fact most of the time they don't even put that attribute there because it doesn't make any sense to them. So if you are a PHP developer, do not venture into this because it's not going to make any difference in your life whether they put that ID or not. It is for the people who are there at the front side, not to the back end people. Again, if you are on the front side, then you will have to bother about it. Then we have this method and action. Method is the way in which you put the information. The action is who is going to handle it. It could be JSP, PHP, or anything. So you have an action that is, you are saying who is going to perform an action. What's the meaning of saying action there is when this data is sent onto the server, who is going to perform that action. It could be a CGI script, it could be a Perl script, it could be a PHP, it could be a ASP, it could be anything. Somebody is going to take care of that input. That's what you're saying. ID is an unique ID. Remember, a very important thing, ID is internally used by the browsers. So when you put a text box, when you put a label, or when you put a checkbox, when you put a button, for the browser, that ID makes a lot of difference. For your PHP, that ID does not count, but for the browser, it makes a lot of sense. So try to put it, if at all you are using CSS, because it makes a lot of sense. Let's come back to the next one, and there are two types of method in which you can submit the data. One is the get, and the other one is the post. Get is the default one. I have the difference between both of them in the next slide, I suppose. So what's the difference between a get and post? So get, whatever you type will be available on the browser window. So when you start a browser, and I'm not going to try to do that, on the URL, whatever value that the user has typed, the data will be visible to them. Some scenario it is very useful. In some other scenario, it could be very dangerous, like trying to expose out the password to the others. So somebody may be standing behind the person, and you open up, and if you use the get method, it's going to come. So the other one, the problem with the get is you can't send a large byte data with the get. Get is always restricted with the number of characters. How many characters depends on the browser, and the get cannot be used to upload a file. If that method will fail altogether. Okay. The good part about the get is it can be good. So what's the meaning of this? Suppose it appears here. Now suppose if I type India here, and you notice that the Google is giving me the question Q, and I don't have an internet. So it's going to say the question that I am trying to supply is India. Now tomorrow if I want to supply the same question, I'm not going to type that thing. What I'm going to say is add it. I'm not going to do it. So I'm going to just say bookmark this particular thing by clicking it on the favorite. So this entire string as it is will be sent to the other side. So if you want the person to bookmark one particular place with their request, use the get. With the post, you know very well, these things will not be shown. If it was a post request, that thing is sent, but it is not shown to the user. So there is no way they can bookmark this one. When they bookmark, they will just get that google.com. If they bookmark it, they will end up in going to the google.com, not the search key that they were typing. So they will not reach that particular. For example, if you use this get method, and if you have course is MCA, semester is second sem, if that is coming over here, for example, just one thing. So if it's going to come like course is MSc and semester is say 2. Now if they bookmark this one, when they make it as favorite, immediately when they click on that favorite and they say go to my favorite thing, immediately they will reach this place. Whereas if this was a post method, this piece would have sent in the body and they might not have got that thing. It's not possible for them to bookmark it. That's the bad part. There is one other thing you must understand. One is the intention of using get. Remember, when you use the get, your intention as a developer, your intention is that request will not make any changes to my application. If you have a request that does not change the state of your application, use get. For example, somebody says, what is my result? So they are going to give you register number 123. You are supposed to just read the result from the database and show it. It's not going to update the database. Use the get. If that request is going to make some changes to the data which is there in the database or in your application, then go for post. So post means the intention of the user is to modify something on the server. Get means they are sending a query and that will not make any changes to your application or your database. Always remember that thing. For example, if they query their request, their result, so some people are very happy they got first class, 100 times they will come and see their result. It's not going to make any difference to your application. Maybe you are running some CPU cycle, it's not going to change it. Go for a post, get. If it is a updation like creation of a new user, go for a post. Stop with that.